Good morning, people. Morning. It is Monday, September 9th. We're coming along through September as we did with the rest of the months fairly quickly. So let's see what's going on. Look at some of the news. One of the main things that popped up on the news this morning was Janet Yellen yet again talking about recent economic data signaling the U.S. economy is pulling off a soft landing. Now, one of the things with Yellen that we have to understand is she was one of the main people that was talking about inflation, like the transitory nature of inflation the last time around, as we saw inflation was indeed not transitory going into the last few years and quarters. So, taking this with a grain of salt, she also noted that there are some downside risks to employment. So, what I see when I look at the economy is very strong growth deep into a recovery, with the economy operating basically at full employment. So, Yellen said at the Texas Tribune Festival, adding that there are no red lights flashing. Her statements followed last week's jobs data and renewed growth fears, triggering the S&P's worst weekly sell-off since 2023's regional banking crisis. If we look at the SPOOs on a week-to-week basis, right, if we go into a one-week chart here, starting September was pretty weak, right? So this was the 1 week move. We're down a total of 4%. We're trying to pull up a little here pre-market from last week's weakness. We'll talk about what that looks like in terms of our trading plan for the day. But we've seen a lot of those gains get wiped out in just a single week pretty quick, just as the upside took over on the S&P and just general equities from that early August rally. Now, there's some other news. Construction. So we're looking at Google. Google has been beat up a lot. Google, from a very strong move to the upside, now trading back down under the 200-day moving average. So this was one of the weaker stocks on the rally that we saw in terms of the early August pump, right, with big tech generally doing pretty well, but Google off of that low, right, we managed to only rally about like nearly 9% from that area, and now we're down significantly again. So Google from its all-time high, for instance, like Meta made a new all-time high. Google from its all-time high currently trading about 20% lower. So Google and Tesla were some of the weaker movers in terms of that most recent rally. So some of the news out of the Justice Department's second antitrust trial against Google will begin today in Virginia, where the search giant will defend itself against claims that it illegally operates a monopoly in the advertising market. The DOJ is seeking at minimum the divestiture of Google Ad Manager platform. The trial comes a little over a month after the landmark courtroom chip development by ARM's latest design architecture. So Apple was one of those names that did pretty good, honestly, off of the rally from the lows, but it is pulling off right now from a lower high. It's just Google had its chance to kind of catch up and could have potentially evaded this larger downside, but tech and chips said maybe next time. Some of the other news here. We've got, what else do we have? We don't have too much news today, as this is the first full week of September. Last week was cut short. And typically, there was an instance where I saw someone did some research on short weeks and short red weeks. And a lot of those short red weeks turned into a potential reversal. Now, the thing that we have to understand here is that we're moving into weak seasonality, right, where we could see lower lows and lower highs continue for a set period of weeks. I don't necessarily think that, okay, boom, this is the bottom. It's a good area to see some kind of little pullback and attempted pushes to the upside. But generally speaking, that seasonality kind of just wanes into October, towards end of October, before we start seeing any real. One of those weaker names, remember, tech is fairly underway right now from fund holdings, as it was last year at this time. So something to consider as seasonality continues to get weak. I'm honestly looking for a little more weakness into the next few weeks before we find some kind of major bottom going into the Fed first cut, right? The first cut is September 18th, coming out in 2 weeks now. 2 weeks, is that right? Not this week, but next week. Yeah, that's right. So we have inflation data. We have inflation data this week. That's what a lot of eyes are going to be on. We've got CPI and PPI. We'll see how those bode, but generally the inflation data has been pretty strong. So seeing a little pop going into that Fed cut might make a little more sense here. So we'll play it day by day and year by year. So let's take a look at what's going on here. The S&P 500. Let's take a look at the overall movement for today. We have continuously just dropped into key auctions and balances to the downside time and time again over the last week. That was triggered on what was it triggered on? The first day back from on Tuesday from that long weekend, and we've been ever since just toppling over. So right now the S&P 500, we have this massive distribution to the downside around 5,400, 5,410 that it's so far for the time being evading. We've seen a little pop on the overnight session. And realistically, right, there is still some downside pressure if we fail to hold 5480, meaning if we fail to move above 5480. I think the sellers try that area to kind of push prices down. Right now, is if we stand above 5440, we're in between those two low volume areas where we could see a little more movement realistically in terms of a sideways chop before we can accept into a balance. So realistically, under 5440, the bear side is going to open up, in my opinion, a little more aggressively. Above the 5480, we have a chance for that buyer to go and tag that 5510. So in a limbo state right now, it's more so who can take control of the movement above or below some key levels. Right now, slight little bullishness on the overnight session that's been created going into this week. And we'll see, as long as 5440 holds, 5435 to 40, there can be some attempted little rallies that might spark as we get into that CPI inflation data coming out on Wednesday pre-market. So with that being said, I hope everyone has an amazing trading day. We will do this again tomorrow, and take care. Trade maybe more defensively going into CPI. We might have lower volume going into CPI.